welcome to today's episode of the Peak Physique Podcast. The Peak Physique Podcast is a podcast for adults who are trying to get their fire back. This podcast has two missions: deliver great information about wellness and deliver that information in under 15 minutes. With that being said, let's jump into today's subject, which is the pros and cons of the BMI scale. So, if you're not familiar with the BMI scale, it is an assessment tool which tells us where you're at as far as your weight and your health ratio of your weight. BMI stands for body mass index. And basically, it's a formula that takes into factor your height, weight, gives a number, and the number categorizes you either as a healthy weight, overweight, or obese. Me personally, at this very moment, I am in the overweight category. And a little story as we're going through this podcast today that kind of has something to do with this. When I was in college was the first time that I learned about the BMI scale. And I was shocked to see that I was actually in the overweight category, and took it kind of personally, which I'm sure I'm not the only one. It's kind of shocking when you work out your whole life and find out that you're in fact overweight by the testing standard. Um, Around that time, maybe 6-7 months later, I decided to drop some weight, roughly around 30 pounds, to compete in a mixed martial arts fight at 155. By the time I reached 155 pounds, I looked like a cancer patient. My cheekbones were sunk in, and just generally didn't look good. When people saw me, they were like, "What is going on?" And not to mention, I felt like crap. But I remember thinking at the time, I wonder where I stand now on that BMI scale. And I went and I calculated it. And in that time when I couldn't have felt worse, I was considered a healthy weight. And I guess that tells you where I stand on how I feel about the BMI scale. But with that being said, let's jump into the pros, because there are definitely pros about using this tool. Um, it's typically used in Western medicine. When you go in for a physical with your doctor, it's a nice tool to use because it's fast to assess. It's easy to do. You just simply take the body weight, height, and you use the formula created, and it tells you your number. There's three categories that you can fall into after they figured out your body weight index, and that is healthy weight, overweight, or obese. And it's a good initial screening tool. I think that if you do have a reading that falls into the overweight or obese category, that should just be the start of more testing. But it's a great way to just say, okay, there's some red flags here. We might need to look into things a little bit more accurately. And if you are a person who doesn't exactly like lift weights or has a history of being very active, it's probably a good tool to use, the BMI. But if you're somebody who works out a lot, it's not the greatest thing in the world. So let's jump into the cons. And that first one is kind of what I was just talking about. So the BMI does not factor in your muscle mass whatsoever. It just takes that height, that weight, and away you go. It doesn't take a look into how much of that weight might be fat, how much of it might be muscle. It just says, here's your two numbers, here we go, and you're good to go. Also, doesn't take into factor a person's overall health. You don't look at a blood panel when you look at a BMI test, and a blood panel probably tells you a lot more about somebody's longevity than this BMI number really does. So, in my opinion, those are two very big cons. And if you have gotten a bad reading on that BMI test, maybe you're in the overweight or obese category, what I think you should do is move further into more testing. And with that being said, let's jump into some good alternatives or some steps forward after you've gotten a BMI reading that concerns you. So, in most good gyms in the US, you can find good assessment tools to tell you your body fat. And I think body fat is going to give you a much better idea of if you're in a bad situation or a good situation. At my gym, Peak Physique, we use InBody. InBody tells us in a very, very accurate manner how much percentage of your weight is body fat versus muscle. And it also breaks down a bunch of other numbers that really jump deep into your overall health. Going back to what I had said before too, when you get your BMI test done, it doesn't really jump into your blood work, which really tells us more about your overall health. So I think, if you do have a high BMI reading, your next step would be to go get your blood work done. If you got your BMI done while you were at a physical, most likely you're already getting that blood panel taken, so that's probably already taken care of. But what you should do is look more closely at those numbers. How's your cholesterol? How's your blood pressure? Your iron levels? All of those things are going to tell you more about your overall health than this simple BMI calculation that we use on this. Anyway, that's really all I have to say about this. Again, it's a good initial tool, but not something that you should beat yourself up about if you have a bad reading, especially like if you're really on the cusp of overweight and healthy weight. But again, if you do get a reading that concerns you, your next step should be to go find a gym that you can get your body fat calculated at, get your blood work done, focus more on those numbers. Those are going to tell you more about your body's overall health anyway. With that being said, thanks for listening, everybody. Very excited about our next episode. Next week, I'm going to have a guest come on, and not going to tell you anything other than that. All you need to know right now is I'm not going to be sitting here talking to myself, and I'm excited about that. But anyway, if you guys found this useful, maybe you know somebody in your life that's beating themselves up right now because they had a high BMI reading, share this on Facebook. Share this with them. And if you're interested in working with Peak Physique, or maybe you do yourself want to get an in-body assessment done, my email is in the comment section. You can find me by just sending me a quick email, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Anyway, thanks for watching, listening, whatever you did. Have a great rest of your day.